Tonight on KQED Newsroom, President Biden is in California today, addressing concerns over soaring inflation and a looming recession. We talk with our panel of reporters about economic concerns and big hearings on Capitol Hill. Plus, access to abortion and gun control remain serious concerns for Californians. Our special guest tonight, State Senator Nancy Skinner, shares the latest on change-making legislation. And we visit a community farm in Albany in this week's look at something beautiful. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco, this Friday, June 10th, 2022. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Priya David Clemens. Major economic news today. The Consumer Price Index hit a 40-year high for inflation as prices rose 8.5% from a year ago. Stock markets dropped sharply, with the Dow falling 880 points, 2.5% in response. There are increased concerns about a coming recession. The World Bank is warning of stagflation, a mix of low growth and high prices. President Joe Biden spoke this morning at the Port of Los Angeles about these economic concerns.
But make no mistake about it. I understand inflation is a real challenge to American families. Today's inflation report confirmed what Americans already know. Putin's price hike is hitting America hard. Gas prices at the pump, energy and food prices account for half of the monthly price increases since May.
All of this economic news is playing out against a political backdrop of primary elections and hearings on Capitol Hill. Joining us now are San Francisco Chronicle's Washington correspondent Tal Koppen via Skype and Market Watch San Francisco bureau chief Jeremy Owens. Thank you both for being with us. Jeremy, these financial concerns are playing out with very real effects in our everyday life. The price of gas seems insane, inordinate compared to what we're used to seeing. Historic highs, rising food costs. Give us a snapshot of what we're looking at economically living here in California.
Well, we're dealing with inflation that we have not seen in 40 years. We saw another report on that this morning. We also got consumer sentiment. Consumers are finally feeling this inflation in a way that the consumer sentiment plummeted to a record low when it was expected to increase this month. So we're seeing consumers react now to what's happening. The World Bank this week warned about stagflation. Now what that is stagnant growth and inflation combined. We haven't seen that since the 70s, really. And here in the Bay Area, that stagnant growth is going to be felt a lot more if it's being felt by tech companies. We have survived and sustained for so long on these high growth tech companies. We've already seen layoffs increase in April and May, and now we're seeing companies like Coinbase really cut costs. They even rescinded job offers for people that they had already offered to who had quit other jobs or turned down other jobs to go to Coinbase. Some of those people are in danger of being deported out of the United States because if they don't find another job within 90 days. They also said they're going to cut costs on things like cloud computing, right? That ripples through. And if all of these tech companies are buying less from other tech companies and consumers are cutting back their spending because of inflation, we are going to be really hard to avoid a recession.
All right, Tal, how are you seeing these significant inflation concerns playing out in the political sphere?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, Republicans think it's, anything the Democrats say is going to help them in the election coming up in November. Republicans say, fat chance if you're looking at inflation and gas prices like this, and I don't really know that you could talk to any politician these days who would tell you it doesn't matter. Republicans say that with Biden's sagging approval ratings, Democrats having this situation happening under their watch, that they will take control of Congress. You may see them do better in states like California, some of those swing seats that should favor Democrats, perhaps will go Republicans' way. Now, Democrats say that they do have a plan to address this. Republicans really don't have anything to offer other than criticizing Democrats for it happening. So, especially over the next few months as we move into November, you're going to see a lot of jockeying on this issue. But just historically, when voters are feeling this much pain on the home front, when they're having trouble, making it through the month on their budgets, when they have these kinds of pain points, at the gas pump, at the grocery store, it's really hard for any incumbent elected official to kind of overcome that sentiment at the ballot.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we saw in the late 70s with Jimmy Carter. Biden is dealing with inflation and gas prices like we have not seen since then, basically. And he's going to be hard pressed to win these midterms and move into the next presidential cycle with what's happening right now.
All right, let's turn now to a major hearing in D.C. yesterday by the January 6th Commission. We want to listen now to a particularly compelling moment from those hearings from one of the Capitol Police officers.
What I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I had seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, they had, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood.
Tal, what are you watching for as these hearings unfold?
Well, first off, we should say these are incredibly important hearings. We are going to get probably the fullest picture we've gotten to date of what happened on January 6th, 2021, which was truly a grave, serious threat to our democracy when it happened. And, I was not in the Capitol. I have many friends who were in the press corps. Obviously, there were politicians there. It was a really dangerous and awful situation, and it's important for the public to have a full understanding of that. That said, there's a real question as to what these hearings are supposed to accomplish. And, it sort of depends who you ask. And there is a real question in my mind how much of the public does not already have a sort of baked in opinion of what happened. People who already recognize that was a pretty horrible day are probably going to have that affirmed by these hearings. There is a broad chunk of the population that seems to have made up their mind that they're not going to take this seriously, and I don't know how you reach them. One of the interesting things that's worth remembering about these hearings is that the sort of Trump supportive wing of the GOP passed on their opportunity to participate. They decided to boycott the committee. They were offered an opportunity to name some people to it, but Speaker Pelosi vetoed a couple of the names, and the Republicans pulled out. So the two Republicans who are on the committee, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, are really in line with the Democrats on the committee in terms of the threat to the democracy. And so these hearings, unlike many in Washington, have no counter programming. They are highly choreographed by the people in the committee, and there isn't really any sort of surprise factor for the people laying out the case. So over the next week or two, we're going to see a really detailed presentation painting a very robust picture of the events that happened on January 6th. I just don't know if it's going to necessarily change many people in America's minds about that day.
Yeah. We will be hearing, we're expecting at least to be hearing from some leading tech companies. Facebook and Google have been subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. Jeremy, what do you expect we're going to hear from them?
Well, it depends on what they can get out of them. We've had reports this week that Twitter has bucked at giving over its internal Slack messages. So what they're willing to give that committee and what they're willing to say are going to be two different things, and what that committee is really looking for. And executives constantly say, we are not the problem here. We are just offering communications platforms and people are using it to communicate. That might be an issue, but we're really going to have to see what they find in the subpoenas that they put out before we know what they're going to be able to say.
Okay. Sort of thinking back on past hearings, sort of expect them to say, not our responsibility.
Of course.
Whatever it is that happened, we're just a platform.
While the politicians will try to beat them up, and because it's a pretty popular position to be against big tech at this point in time.
All right, let's turn back to the primaries now. Let's take a quick look back at what happened, right? In San Francisco, District Attorney Chesa Boudin was voted out of office by a margin of 20%. Mayor Breed is expected to appoint his replacement in July. Statewide, Governor Newsom, Senator Alex Padilla, and Attorney General Rob Bonta were all top vote getters by wide margins. And Tal, you've been tracking some key congressional races in California. Tell us what's happened as a result of Tuesday's vote and what you're going to be looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, well, writ large, I don't think we have any real surprises in terms of who's advancing to November. For the most part, the sort of favorites to be in the top two largely across the board appear to be on track for that. It's important to remember that with the way California counts votes and the amount of ballots that could still be outstanding, which is a number we don't know, some of these races could shift. And many of them, it won't really change significantly, but a couple points in either direction could make a really big difference in how we interpret some of the results from some of these races. And, there are a couple really interesting swing seats that potentially could be surprising. For example, Josh Harder in the Central Valley, who's an incumbent Democrat, he actually weathered a pretty bad midterm election last cycle for some swing seat Democrats. He weathered that just fine. He's running in a new district that's supposed to be a little bit better for him. Mm-hmm. The results right now don't look great. I mean, I think the Democrats are lagging the Republicans in vote totals there. Conversely, in Palm Springs, a race I wrote about for the San Francisco Chronicle that Barbara Boxer is heavily involved in, right now, Democrats are getting more votes than incumbent Ken Calvert, and that's supposed to be a safer seat for him. So we'll have to see where these go. And then, of course, we'll have to see how different this electorate is from November. This was a pretty boring primary, to be quite frank. And there will also be some ballot measures that could potentially be really motivating for certain voting groups in November. So a lot of tea leaves still yet to be read, but certainly some interesting races that seem they could be very close in November.
And Jeremy, some in the national media and locally here have portrayed Chesa Boudin's loss in San Francisco as a backlash against criminal justice reform. You've been looking at the numbers. You see this differently.
Definitely, I see it differently when you look at the East Bay, right? In Alameda County, we had a progressive DA candidate poll well and get into the runoff. We had a progressive sheriff's candidate poll well. In Contra Costa County, we had a progressive district attorney just flat win her race and won't even have to go to a runoff to take that farther. And we did see a lot of people move out of San Francisco and into the East Bay. So I don't see that thoughts on progressive crime approach have changed. Just the people have kind of changed a little bit, and Chesa was not popular. But it shouldn't be written any larger than that.
Okay. Tal, I do want to go to some other legislation that's happening on Capitol Hill. Congress is taking up gun control. So the House passed bills to restrict purchasing of semi-automatic weapons and to adjust the age at which you can buy those, restrict purchasing on large capacity magazines, as well as passing a red flag bill. These now go to the Senate, but what action do you expect to move forward from there?
Well, it's sort of a truism in Washington that forever frustrates the House, but it doesn't really matter what the House does, I'm afraid. The truth is that nothing can get passed in Washington unless it can get through the Senate. And right now, there are some gun talks that are happening among a handful of Democrats and a handful of Republicans in the Senate that, seem to be going better than pretty much anything has in recent memory, which isn't to say that they're a lock. It never is. But there is some cause for optimism. It will be a package much smaller than what the House passed, without a doubt. But if those talks go somewhere, that will be what passes. That said, there's a real push by, advocates of gun violence prevention for the administration to do more through executive action. And interestingly, when she was running for president herself, now Vice President Kamala Harris had a pretty robust set of proposals that, that she and her team thought that the president could actually expand background checks and close a lot of the loopholes that legislation want to by regulation, completely by itself. There were a couple other proposals. This administration has not adopted those. And President Biden was actually on Jimmy Kimmel this week and basically was asked about this and said he believes that his predecessor, Donald Trump, way overused executive authority, and he is not going to do the same and basically shut down those proposals. So,
all right,
you're going to see a lot of frustrated advocates on that front.
All right. Tal Kopin, Jeremy Owens, thank you both.
Thank you.
Over the past several weeks, many Californians have been rallying to support access to abortion as we await a final Supreme Court decision that could roll back abortion rights for many states across the nation. And in the wake of the tragic mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas, gun control is being heavily debated again. State Senator Nancy Skinner has co-authored a proposed state constitutional amendment to protect access to abortion, and she's been supporting other bills to fast-track gun safety legislation this year in California. State Senator Skinner joins me now. Welcome to the show, Senator.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. We have been particularly focused on gun laws these days, and not only because of what happened in Texas, it happens in our own backyard. Just yesterday, a 16-year-old boy was shot and killed with a high-powered rifle in Oakland. And you know, we generally think of ourselves here in California as a national leader when it comes to gun control. From your perspective, could you tell us about the situation in terms of gun violence, gun control in California at this point?
Certainly. Well, look, gun violence is epidemic proportions, though it is lower in California. And it's lower because we have very good gun safety laws, gun control laws, and gun violence prevention laws. The 10 states with laws like California have the lowest per capita gun deaths, whereas Texas and Florida, they way exceed us. And when I say epidemic proportions across the country, just this year alone, we're talking 2022, there have been already 240 what's defined as mass shootings, and that's where 4 or more people are killed by a gun. Now, the reason we have fewer in California, we have an assault weapons ban. We have really thorough background checks and a waiting period before you can get your gun. And we have the red flag law, which allows you or I, if we know someone close to us who is making credible threats of violence against themselves or others, then you can get a restraining order quickly and get guns out of their hands temporarily to help prevent that gun violence. That could have been done for the Uvalde shooter. That could have been done for so many people. And I first initiated that law after the Isla Vista shooting in 2014.
And there are a couple of more bills that are making their way through the legislature right now that you're supporting. In addition, there's more funding that's being proposed by the legislature above and beyond what Governor Newsom had proposed in his last revise.
Well, in addition to our laws, we fund what's called the Armed Prohibited Persons List. So in a background check, there's various categories where you're not allowed to purchase a weapon or possess one. So you might have already owned it, but then you become on the Armed Prohibited Persons List. And we fund our Department of Justice, our Attorney General's office, to go and take those guns out of those homes. So that's part of our budgetary expenditures. We also fund gun violence prevention, where, you know, folks like in Oakland, there's a group called Youth Alive, and they show up at the hospital when a gun violence victim shows up. And they help that family, because a lot of gun deaths are revenge shootings. And they intervene and they help support that family, support that gun violence victim to demotivate any type of revenge shootings.
There's also a lot of money here for gun buybacks, for other prevention programs, and then victim services.
Well, unfortunately, if you are the victim of gun violence because a gun owner doesn't have to carry insurance, because you know, whatever all those costs, your hospitalization, all of that is borne by you and I. If we can reduce those costs, then obviously we're gonna we'll have less cost to you and I and the taxpayer. But the victim, they end up paying for it all themselves. So our victim services program, and I'm carrying a bill right now to increase the dollars that we would provide to victims, because the trauma from a gunshot wound affects the entire family and the person, of course. So we want to help them recover.
Let's turn now to the issue of abortion and access to abortion. There's a large slate of bills that's making its way through the legislature right now, 14 of them, one of which you are the co-author of, the constitutional amendment.
Yes.
Tell us about that bill in particular, and perhaps touch on a few of the others.
Well, the leaked decision by Alito, the Supreme Court, which threatens to overturn Roe v. Wade, basically undermines all privacy. And in California, your and my ability to legally have an abortion and our right to an abortion is based on California's privacy rules in our Constitution. And given that the Supreme Court seems to be willing to rip out privacy, we have to make abortion rights explicit in our Constitution. So the head of our state Senate, Senator Toni Atkins from San Diego, she has authored that constitutional amendment, which I'm confident our legislature will pass, and it will be put on the ballot, and that Governor Newsom would sign, and it will be put on the ballot in November for Californians to vote squarely that we support the legal right to an abortion for everyone.
We're also looking at expanding services for people who may come from out of state. But even here within California, while, you know, we see abortion as remaining legal, there are barriers to access for many people.
We have a huge state. It's huge. So if you live in certain rural counties, you might have to drive the whole day to get to a clinic where you could get an abortion. And, you know, there's a lot of costs involved in that. So I'm carrying another bill where we would set up a website, California would set up a website with information about what your rights are, because abortion is legal in California and it will stay legal, but where you can get those services. And then associated with that website would be a fund where you could apply for practical support if you needed it. If you needed childcare costs or travel costs, for example. And we would leave that open to anyone.
You spoke recently, last month, at a rally at Lake Merritt, and you were pretty heated there. So let's take a listen.
Men making laws about women's bodies. Who the decided that that made sense? What happens? Like most people, I have an unexpected pregnancy. Who hasn't? It happens. And I was able to get my abortion at a safe and legal clinic.
Would you feel comfortable sharing more about your personal experience and how that's shaped your perspective as a lawmaker?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't believe that we would be at the point in time where any of us would be required to carry a pregnancy against our will. To me, that is criminal. And you know, when I was a kid, I grew up in a very large Irish Catholic family. I have 8 brothers and sisters, and we were anti-abortion, and just that was the religious belief. And my mother even would go to the big rallies that the Cardinal in LA ran at the Coliseum against abortion. And I thought, well, I didn't think I would ever have an abortion. But of course, it wasn't a practical thing to me. It wasn't something that I really faced. And then I was in college, and I got pregnant unexpectedly. This is something that was not in my life plan, and especially not with the particular person who, you know, I had sex with. And so I got an abortion, and I was able to get that legally, medically safe, and I had no regrets.
Was that hard for you at that time?
Well, it was interesting to me when I confronted it. It was really about my life, and it was a simple decision, because I was thinking about, had no income. I had no ability to really care for or support a child. I didn't know what career I would face. And the person who, you know, I had sex with was not prepared in any way to be a father. So when you think about it from that point of view, it made total sense to not proceed with that pregnancy. And that's why the decision was, you know, again, not a difficult decision for me. And I was so thankful to be able to go to a safe, good medical clinic and legally do that.
So let's turn now to money, the very sharp turn here over to this enormous budget surplus that we have here in California. Historic, almost $100 billion. And you're the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. So tell us about how this budget surplus is going to play out. Half of it has to go to education. Are we going to be seeing more teachers in schools? What can students and parents expect?
Well, California fortunately has a very progressive income tax system where the very wealthiest in our state, and we have a very wealthy state, there's a lot of billionaires, they pay the highest taxes. And you know, in the pandemic, many of us didn't do so well, but a lot of people did very well. And so those upper income earners, that's why California has so much money right now. And this surplus is not really something we can count on every year into the future, so we're constrained to use it for what we call kind of one-time purposes. So those are things like infrastructure. And at schools, it's for fixing the buildings, for example, or for getting new buses, that kind of thing. But because our overall budget is also increased, not just the surplus, we're going to have the highest amount of funding per pupil in California history. So our schools are going to do very well. And it might mean more teachers, but certainly better classroom supplies, better learning opportunities, and I think kids and their families will do very well.
In the last minute here, I just want to touch on a topic in which the governor and the legislature differ in their approach. And this is in particular some stimulus relief, some funding back to individuals from this budget surplus to especially help with the pain at the gas pump, the other inflationary costs that we're seeing. So the governor's proposal is a one-time refund based on car ownership. If you have a vehicle, you can get $400, up to 2 vehicles, and there's money for free public transit for about 3 months. Your proposal in the legislature is to have cash payments for individuals. It would be $200 per person, and this would be for people who are earning under $250,000 filing jointly, or under $125,000 if you're filing alone. There's also some additional income for low-income Californians. Why is your plan better?
Well, we're different because the governor, as you mentioned, he wants to give you the money based on the number of cars you own, independent of how much money you make. We've got families and low-income people that have no cars. And we also have large low-income families with maybe only 1 car. So then they only get $400. And so we feel that the people that are really suffering from these high costs are your middle-income and low-income people. And which is about our structure, or our plan would cover about 90% of Californians. And we want to give $200 to every individual and their kids.
Okay. State Senator Nancy Skinner, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
This week's Something Beautiful is a bright and bustling community farm in Albany, the Gill Tract, where farmers work alongside students and families to produce healthy, locally grown food. What a lovely spot to get your hands in the earth. That's the end of our show for tonight. You can find KQED Newsroom online or on Twitter, or email us at knr@kqed.org. And you can always reach me on social media at Priya D. Clemens. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you right back here next Friday night. Have a great weekend.